You hold an MBA degree and a law degree, and you had a career in finance as well, I guess. How did you land it in Hollywood?
I'd always been a writer since I was a child, but it was never something I thought I could do professionally. I couldn't see a way to make a living out of it. And so I went and did what a lot of people do. I went for the path that I thought was going to lead to security, which was a path that I thought get all these great degrees, get an MBA, get a law degree, and you'll have lots of opportunities. And I did all of that, and then I just wasn't fulfilled. And so I started writing just to partly to pass my own time and to give myself a creative outlet. And then to my great surprise, I sold a script to Paramount that I just written to entertain myself. And then I realized I could do this professionally, and that was back in 2001. So I've been doing this now professionally for 16 years. My first novel is known as Mother of the Believers, and it's a historical fiction novel about the birth of Islam, told from the point of view of the Prophet's wife, Aisha. And I wrote that novel because it's something that I've actually wanted to do since I was a child, because Aisha herself, as a historical figure, single-handedly breaks every stereotype people have of Muslim women. You know, people think Muslim women are weak and oppressed and powerless, and she was a strong-willed, intelligent woman who was not only a scholar, she was also a political leader and ultimately even a warrior. She led armies. And so she's such a remarkable figure, I felt I had to tell her story. The major challenges I experienced in telling that was it was not actually the historical data, because we actually have a massive amount of historical information about Aisha, because she is known as the second most prolific narrator of Islamic traditions. So she has a lot of accounts out there that we were able to use. The problem actually was in getting first the Muslim community to accept it, because many Muslims were like, why are you writing a novel about these holy people? And so many of them resisted reading it. But when they actually read it, a lot of them fell in love with it and thought this was really brought to life characters that seemed so distant to them. They were just figures that people talked about in the mosque, but they didn't seem like real human beings. And my purpose in the novel was to show her and all the Sahaba and the Prophet, peace be upon him, as a real human being, as they were portrayed in the original message. So that was a challenge amongst the Muslims. There was also a challenge amongst the non-Muslims, is that there was a lot of resistance to actually publicizing the novel within the publishing world. I have a wonderful publisher, Simon & Schuster, one of the top publishers in the world, and they aggressively put it out there. But none of the major newspapers would review it, because I guess they were afraid of the topic. And as a result, it didn't get a lot of publicity. And so the blessing has been that I actually didn't need the New York Times to do a review of the novel. The novel has spread consistently through word of mouth. People read it, they fall in love with it, they give it to a friend, and it was published back in 2010, and here we are, almost 7-8 years later, and it's still spreading. It's purely spreading through word of mouth, and that's a blessing. Well, I think all writers are born writers. I think every writer that I've ever worked with professionally has been writing since they were a child. Certainly that was my case. I was always a reader. I think all writers have to be readers, so I loved books passionately since I was a little child. And my favorite books as a child was the Agatha Christie novels, all those murder mysteries. And so I actually wrote my very first short story that I got published in the school newspaper when I was in 6th grade, which was a murder mystery set in school. And so I've always been a writer, and I think you have to actually be a professional. It's something that's a compulsion. No one chooses to write, because writing, of all the arts, I think writing is the loneliest, where you're isolated, you're locking yourself up in your room, and you're just alone with the computer, and you're staring at that page, and it's very difficult. And the only reason you do it is if you have no choice but to do it, and that certainly is in my case. It's a compulsion.
Okay.
Well, the major hurdles that I face as a writer are the hurdles first that every writer faces. First, it's an unpredictable field. Working in the arts, it's not a 9-to-5 job. Sometimes you're very successful and you make a lot of money and you're set for a year or 2 years. Often you spend months or years just struggling to pay your rent and doing other side jobs just to be able to continue to follow your art. And I've been through all of that. And all artists have to go through that, I think. Certainly if they're good artists. I'm always careful of people that have it too easy too early, because they don't really learn the discipline of the art that comes from that struggle. The other challenge that I face is more because of the topics that I write and my identity. I've written a lot about Islam, And being a practicing Muslim myself, there's a lot of people that have an issue with that within the power structure of Hollywood and in the publishing industry that don't want to promote stories about Muslims by Muslims. They have an agenda of how Islam is portrayed, and they're very nervous about allowing Muslims to speak for themselves, and certainly in ways they cannot control. And so the obstacles I face both in Hollywood and the publishing world are overcoming that bigotry and resistance. But all you can do is keep persisting and trusting God, which I have done.
Fantastic.
We think in Hollywood that Muslims are always shown as villains and as terrorists, and that is largely true, I think, but it's also evolved. I often talk about Hollywood initially started off portraying Muslims very positively, but they were magical creatures. The early films back in the 20s and the 30s, you had the Aladdin and the Sinbad, the Alibaba movies and the Arabian Nights. So Muslims were shown as very magical people. They were shown as heroic, but they had flying carpets. They weren't real human beings with real problems. And then that transformed over decades to becoming just the villainous Muslim who hijacks airplanes or sets off bombs. And, that is, to some degree, the result of ignorance of people in Hollywood who don't know Muslims. And so the only narrative they know are those kinds of things. They think of Muslims as either Scheherazade or some crazy terrorist. That's from their lack of information. The other things are there are people that know that Muslims are more complex than that, and then they have political agendas anyway, and they just want to show Muslims in a certain way to promote their political agendas. The situation has changed to some degree. Like my TV show Sleeper Cell that was on Showtime back in 2005, 2006, it was a breakthrough because it showed a Muslim hero fighting terrorists. So that was a major breakthrough in a film we'd never seen before. But then there's also been many shows afterwards that aggressively set the clock backwards and try to portray Muslims as even worse because there are people that are afraid of changing that narrative. They don't want to see that narrative change. That's a problem in Hollywood, but also it's a problem that's deeper because it is a shame for all Muslims that our religion, which means peace, is associated with a few people out there who have been causing pain and suffering.
Do you think that your novel has been successful in dispelling misconceptions about Muslims and counter Islamophobia? And if yes, how?
Well, I have two novels. My novel,
Yes.
Mother of the Believers, is about Aisha. I have a second novel, Shadow of the Swords, which is about the Crusades told from a Muslim point of view. Salahuddin is the hero of the story. And there's a lot of novels in the Crusades, but they've never actually been told from the Muslim's point of view. They're always the villains of the story, which is historically a little strange because the Muslims were the civilized people, the Crusaders were the barbarians. But it's an interesting moment. So, both my novels, people read my novels, and I consistently get emails and people say to me in person that it changed their perception of Islam. They had never seen Muslims as real people. They had never seen the Muslim point of view of these major historical events. And then some of them would go, I don't know if this is true or this is propaganda, and then they would go out and they would research after reading my books and discover, no, I authentically presented the situation. And so this opened up a lot of people's hearts, which I'm very grateful for. The major issue is we Muslims have to address whatever problems socially, philosophically, and religiously we're having in our community that are promoting this small but dangerous element within our community that is violent, that is foolish. And it is a very small but extremely dangerous element. And we have to deal with whatever's happening within our societies. And the major issue that's been, in my opinion, is the origin of all of this, is that Muslims have gone away from the traditional interpretation of Islam, which is very broad, very universal, very relaxed, and very wise and very adaptive. Whereas in the last century, especially with the various fundamentalist groups supported by people like the Saudis who took over Mecca and Medina, they're promoting this fundamentalist agenda, whether you want to call it Wahhabism, Salafism, whatever it is, this fundamentalist agenda that's attempting to create a new Islam that never existed, and it's an Islam that's created out of picking and choosing some ideas from the 9th century and saying this was original Islam. Whereas Islam has always been a growing and adaptive religion. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said Islam is water. And what is water? Water flows, it brings life. It takes the Prophet, peace be upon him, said the water takes the shape and the color of the container it's in, and that's what Islam is supposed to be. And so the fact that Muslims have tried in the last century to turn Islam to a religion of rules without love, this is going to be the exact outcome. So Muslims, whether it's the West or elsewhere, have to address the fundamental issue, which is that we don't know our religion. A lot of us are following a fake religion that's only been invented 100 years ago by people who have no love in their hearts. Islam has always been about love, and if it's not about love, no one wants it. And so there's a famous saying by a Sufi master, Hazrat Inayat Khan, who was one of the great Sufis of India who came to America, and I've always treasured it because the truth is there. which is that everyone surrenders to beauty willingly and to power unwillingly. So Muslims of the last century have been fighting power, whether it's in politics or trying to create an Islamic state as they imagine it to be. None of them are fighting for beauty. None of them are trying to create beauty, which is art, which is love, which is generosity. People will surrender to that Islam in a second. The Islam of power, nobody wants it, because nobody wants anything of power. It's being rammed down their throats. And so when Muslims address this issue of returning to beauty, they will find that all these other problems will correct themselves, inshallah. People sometimes ask me if Muslims should develop their own version of Hollywood. The silly thing of it is that Muslims have the resources today to develop a dozen Hollywoods. I talk about how Hollywood is not a huge industry. It's only about $2 or $3 billion of revenues a year. And Muslims, particularly in the oil-rich countries, they have trillions of dollars. They can make a dozen Hollywoods with their current bank accounts. But they don't want to because for two reasons. Muslims right now are going through a period of low self-esteem about themselves. They don't believe in themselves as artists. They don't believe in themselves as storytellers. They have bought the Western defamation of their religion, and they own it. Non-Muslims will tell them that their religion is backwards and primitive and violent, and Muslims believe that. And so Muslims are embracing that and saying, yeah, let me show you how violent it can be. And that's the silliness of it. When the reality is our religion has always been the progressive sword of humanity that's cutting through all the darkness and the misleading things. We've been the leaders of art and science for 1,400 years, or at least 1,300 years. In the last century, we've forgotten that. And so, I think the bigger issue is when Muslims start embracing art again, which is central to Islam, because the Prophet, peace be upon him, said God is beautiful and loves beauty. That's the basis of art, right? And so when we go back to that, then it doesn't matter whether we create our own Hollywood. We will send artists into the world, even in the current Hollywood. If we flood Hollywood with brilliant, talented actors and writers and directors, they will notice. And they will, if you can create an actor who is up there with the talent of a George Clooney who's Muslim, right? And that will have its own impact. So you don't need to create new Hollywood. You just need to start getting into the industry, period. The major advice I would give to anybody who wants to come to Hollywood, whether it's as an actor or director or writer, is to persist. Because I've seen many people with great talent in Hollywood, forget Muslims, I've seen people who are not Muslim with great talent who come there and they face the obstacles and the disappointments that are inevitable in a creative venture, and they give up and they go home. So despite their wonderful talent, they didn't have the strength to survive. And I've seen people who are not particularly talented, who don't have any great vision or ability, and they just persist and they do what Hollywood is about, which is they network with the right people, they go out there and eventually they have the right number of relationships that they get their project done, and they succeed and they do it again. And so it isn't talent that opened door in Hollywood. It's a wonderful thing if you have talent, it's a blessing. But I've seen people succeed without it. What I've never seen anyone succeed is without persistence. If you don't have persistence, you're not going to succeed. So you have to come there with a plan. You have to understand that there will be many obstacles. You have to accept that there may be many years where you do not succeed and that you are struggling financially. I have sacrificed my personal life for that goal, and for at least a decade of that, of the last 16 years that I've been here, a decade of that has been suffering and lack of economic security and loneliness. But it's what I've chosen. I'd rather die fighting this battle than to not fight it at all. And alhamdulillah, despite all that, I've had successes. And so persistence is the only key. Salamfest is an incredible experience. It's the first time I've been here, and I'm so delighted to see all these artists and people from the broad community coming. And it's not just Muslims, it's people of every background. And here's a wonderful chance to see all the different kind of Muslim artists being honored and featured. And it's an exchange of ideas and people with open hearts touching each other's souls. It's just a wonderful thing. I pray to Allah that this happens every year, and with each year it becomes bigger and gets more attention, because I think Salamfest is exactly what is needed, not just in Melbourne, but in Australia and throughout the world. We need 1,000 Salamfests.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kamran. Thanks for your time.